Good morning, and welcome to episode 36 of the Driller Newscast. That's right, 36 episodes, 9 months of a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the water well and drilling industry. This week is a special episode on hiring heroes and veterans, being that this Friday is Veterans Day. As of March 2021, there are 18.6 million total veterans in the U.S., with 50.5% of all veterans in the labor force. That's about 9.2 million. 66% are 45 years or older. 2% are 24 years or under. 42% of them are Gulf War Era II veterans. I want you to think about that. We've just fought the war on terror for 20 plus years. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, all fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, where are the 2022 numbers? They're out there. But, as unemployment rates have dropped and we look at different situations, it's important to look at these demographics of who we are hiring. And women represent 10% of the total veteran population and 20% of veterans who have served since 9/11. 40% of all women veterans are in the post 9/11 group, compared to 23% of all male veterans. This year, there will be 180,000 service members who will separate from the military and transition to civilian jobs. So what do we got to do better? We need to get rid of the Hollywood concept of hiring a hero, this individual that is going to be 100% got their stuff together, ready to go, early starter, full initiative. We need to create jobs. If we want to bring the veterans into the drilling industry and the construction industry, we got to create challenging and engaging opportunities. We need to clearly state the expectations of the position. We need to give them a known pathway for advancement in the current position and the organization. Furthermore, this is a brotherhood, and we're about to have Jake Fletcher, who writes our leadership column for the Driller magazine, and Robert Myer, United States Marine in Afghanistan and one of the leaders of Talon LPE, who are going to talk about transitioning from full-time service into the drilling and construction industry. One big piece that Robert talks about is a mentor, preferably a veteran, who on arrival can help with the onboarding process. Jake talks about the onboarding process and how these companies believe they've hired this veteran that is just 100% ready to lead. Although then they start thinking about tactics and strategy and all the things that go into military training, and how does that really apply to the construction industry? We need to have a company culture who is fully into adopting this concept. We need to have clear and open verbal and written communications. Veterans are used to hearing from their leadership, usually in person. They want a career professional development. And if you go back to one of my earlier newscasts, Rob Myer talks about, listen, when you hire a veteran, they're still figuring out their new path in life after the military. They may not become a 30-year employee. Veterans want to know what they're doing has meaning. Think about that. All the wells drilled, all of the construction projects around the world that these men and women have been involved in. And then finally, it's got to be the right compensation. And that's one thing that the drilling and construction industry fail at often compared to electricians and pipe fitters and carpenters. It's a great reference. If you go to the Department of Labor.gov employer guide to hiring veterans, Download that PDF, and it's got lots of great tools. That's dol.gov, Employer Guide to Hiring Veterans. We're going to jump right into this conversation with Jake Fletcher and Robert Myer. And they got a lot of great insight to give. And this will be part one of this series. This week is Veterans Day. And I have two great friend and colleagues that I have worked with and also talked stories with, and had some celebratory drinks and trained with. And so first we have Jake Fletcher, who writes our leadership content for the Driller magazine. Say hello, Jake.
Hey, Brock, how's it going? Happy to be here and excited to talk leadership and all the stuff you have on the agenda today.
Great. And next, I have another great friend who I met through drilling, United States Marine. He doesn't have any crayons in hand, so that is good. Rob Myer is one of the leaders of Talon LPE, and I flew out to Amarillo once and did a couple days school with him, and then we became friends and we talked projects. And both of these two men came from, the military into the construction and drilling industry, and we say a lot, we need to hire as many veterans, and we're going to talk about those pitfalls. Say hello, Rob.
Hey, Brock. Thanks for having me. Sorry, I feel that you need to go on offense before we even get started with the insults. I don't know how to respond in an appropriate way for this venue, but
I apologize. So all we talk about in our industry, construction and drilling, is we need to hire the veterans. We need to hire as many vets as possible. And we see, helmets to hard hats. And I believe Lane even has leather necks to rough necks, which James Cooper has been pushing, one of the Lane employees who is a Marine. He's in business development. But let's talk about the reality. First, Jake, as you transitioned into the reserves and then fully retired out of the Red Horse, and you were looking for construction jobs, what were the good points and what were the blockers that you encountered?
Yeah, great question. The good points is that when you have such a wide and different type of experience than most people, you put that stuff on your resume and it stands out easily because, you versus somebody who has, you're listing projects where you've evaluated water wells in Korea, or you've built airfields in the middle of nowhere. These are very different projects. And employers get really excited especially when they're well written. But the issue is that they're not as trusting. They see that experience, they interview you, they'll sit you down, but then when it's time to try and give you a position, maybe the position that they were looking to hire wasn't exactly what they're advertising. I experienced that several times. Or maybe they're just, maybe we're going to give you a trial run. We're not really sure if we want to, put you in a project manager role yet. And it's really insulting because it's like you go from managing, some of the best troops in the world to build things, in my case, and then you come back and somebody's telling you, well, you don't have the right qualifications, or we're not necessarily ready to trust you with this much responsibility yet. And it's kind of like, well, what's the point? Why did I get out of the military then if I was just going to be met with people who didn't want to trust me to do what I was trained to do?
And Rob, you hopped right into drilling right out of the Marines, or did you have a couple other jobs before that?
no, it was the first job offer I got. Drove all the way across country and started having fun. But one of the things that I had challenges with, and that I've seen a lot of people have challenges with, is I came out of combat arms. Okay, so Jake at least had some industry experience, right? And so when you're in combat arms, they talk about, oh, it's great, translate your skills. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's great. But even now, as a manager, as a hiring manager and an employer, I will come across resumes and maybe it doesn't work out for whatever reason, but I'll call that individual and say, hey, you and I need to have a discussion about your resume because it sucks, and I want to help you make it better. And some people are receptive to it, some people aren't. But the other aspect of it is going from the military or any kind of public service into private industry. And Jake, you may not have heard this perspective before, but any manager, when I'm evaluating management candidates, I'm not only looking at their management capability, but I'm also looking at their sales capability, right? And so, coming out of the military, you don't have to sell anybody anything, is the assumption, which isn't actually true. Because, and Jake, I'm sure that you can attest to this, when you're in the military, especially running a unit, you have to sell your unit's capabilities to other commanders to allow them to employ you and your people to the best of their ability and the best of your ability. But I think that especially in private industry, there is a strong concern about just the way public service in general, whether it's the military or not, functions, especially when it comes to the sales and marketing piece, because it's kind of assumed, well, you just get orders and you go and do it. I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, but to a certain extent, you've got to sell yourself or sell your team to even get those orders, and that I think is probably, especially for management roles, as Jake probably experienced trying to apply for project management roles, there's a lot of hesitation about relationship development, CRM, and ability to close deals. And that is one aspect that it took me a long time to learn, which is the financial piece. Because in the military, yes, you have to sell your team, you have to sell your capabilities, you have to go out and find opportunities for yourself, for your team, and everybody else. But what you don't have to do is assign a monetary value to it and worry about gross margins and worry about, net margins and attrition and all of these other things. The military takes the profitability piece out, and they take some component of the attrition piece out. And so that's, I think, the biggest differentiator that I have encountered. And I think, especially for officers getting out or staff NCOs, they need to capitalize on that gap in their resume and do a better job of explaining to people how that all works, especially for Jake in his role as a support component in doing the water wells. Anybody that is supporting anything has to sell what they do. Infantry grunts don't have to sell what they do. Okay, they're asked to go do what they do. But everything else that supports that, they have to sell their services and how they can better facilitate the mission.
Yeah, that was pretty evident, especially on performance reports and things like that. We had to really break down and explain what it is we did. Actually, in construction, it's funny you mentioned the financial piece, because we're supposed to keep track of those metrics for congressional records, because they want to know how much they saved by using military labor, what it would have cost if we had to use contractors, things like that. So I actually did have to do a lot of that.
Rob, you drove across the country. Who recruited you?
Jose Suarez, who now owns and operates TWS Environmental, based in Delaware. And what they do is all remediation, all injection services. But he was in the Marine Corps with Todd Hanna. And I'm sure you've heard Todd's name before. You may not know him, but they both served at Marine Corps Air Station Tustin as crew chiefs on I'm going to screw it up, 46? I don't know. Todd can yell at me later if I got it wrong, but helicopter crew chiefs. And at that time, when I hired into the company, it was 75% Marine Corps vets. And that was solely due to the fact that Jose would go to Camp Lejeune for every separations class and they would go to Camp Pendleton once a month to attend the separations classes. And so from a transition perspective, that made it easy because everybody there understood what I was going through and knew how to support me. Where I could see that going awry for other companies is if you don't have those kind of numbers. At the end of the day, when work's done, people just bounce. And that's a complete change of culture because when you're in the military, you might just bounce, but the only place you have to go to is with everybody else you've been working with all day, you know? And so it's just a little bit different. And part of it is a little bit of inclusion to the point of making people feel comfortable, but then also education to say, like, this is how civilian life works, you know, and allowing them the time and space to figure all of that out. Where I think a lot of people, I would imagine, like, hey, what are you doing after work? They'd be like, why are you asking? You know? And really, they're just asking because they're trying to figure out, you know, something to do. And so I think those, from a transition perspective, that's probably the biggest challenge that people have. And as I'm talking through that, you can imagine a bit of alienation occurring if somebody's like, well, what the heck? Nobody likes me. And it's like, no, that's not the case. It's just not how life is anymore.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely experienced some of that in my first couple of jobs. I was like, you know, this is different. You're just used to, you know, you get off work in the military and either you hang around the shop or whatever, or wherever you go, you're with the same people. And it's just, like you said, it's different.
Speaking of different, obviously drilling and construction, very tribal, experienced in the field based, some good experience, some bad experience, you know, coming from, you know, the Red Horse combat engineers building runways, drilling water wells, that type of stuff, or Rob doing artillery and the deployments that you experienced. How do you handle the lack of discipline? You know, obviously, let's face it, construction is 100% one of those deals where, you know, there's 15 different ways to do it. 3 of them could be safe and efficient, but, you know, you get in there and you want to question why. And because this is the way we've done it. How have you guys handled that?
You want to go first, Rob, or you want me to go?
I'll go. You know, it's tough because in the opener, or maybe before we started recording, I don't remember, but you had made a comment about the difference between SOPs and manuals in the military and the lack thereof in construction. And really, you know, in the military, it's not that outside of the military there's no SOPs or manuals. I just think in the military it's literally like step by step to the point of how to tie your shoes, you know. And so it's not that there are no manuals in civilian life. It's just that there are some baseline open-ended, you know, at the end of the day, there are certain aspects where you are free to do what makes sense on the project. And what I had to learn is that there are certain aspects where it's okay to allow people the freedom to choose between a couple of available options, even if I think that one isn't great, or if I know that one isn't great and it's not going to work. Because at the end of the day, in order for that person to learn and become better themselves, I have to allow them to fail to a certain extent. Because at the end of the day, we're not talking about life or death. If we're behind a day, nobody's going to die. We're not going to derail the whole mission, you know, as long as they're doing it safely. However, I have a buddy who does a military-related podcast, and he was a JTAC, and for those that are uninformed, they control air and naval gunfire and artillery and all kinds of stuff on the battlefield. And the way that he talks about those manuals is that all those rules are written in blood. They're there for a reason. And that's the way that I view a lot of OSHA regs. Those OSHA regs are written in blood. And so there are certain things that we do or don't do or can do or can't do And the reason that we can or can't do those things is because people got hurt or died by doing them. And that doesn't mean that 95% of the time it could be safe, so let's take a risk. That means that 5% of the time somebody died or got horrendously maimed to the point enough that OSHA felt the need to step in. And so I think part of that transition is learning to not be so rigid. There's a lot of people, and going back to your comment about hiring veterans, like there's a certain component of the rigidity, which is nice, but there's a certain component of it where I had to be coached, like, you need to chill out. Like, it's not that big of a deal, I promise. And that was people mentoring me to say, I like your discipline, but you've gone a bridge too far on this one. Jake, I don't know if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that to me, it's kind of a maturity thing. When I first got out, it seemed like every meeting or every place I went to, because, as an officer, I'm so used to sitting in meetings and being prepared to defend my people. Because as a construction, as a construction officer, I would often go into meetings prepared to do battle with people that wanted to misuse my troops because they wanted them to do this or that. And they didn't understand why we couldn't do that or why I wasn't going to allow my troops to be used in that way. So most of my meetings in the military, I was prepared to fight with somebody, not like fist fight, but I was prepared to go against somebody and at least justify why I thought, things should be done a certain way. And when I got out, I had that same mindset. And, I didn't say much in meetings for a while when I first got out. I kind of just paid attention to how people interact outside of the military and how they solve problems, how they come up with solutions and things, because it's much different. In the military, we could sit down and close a door and we could go to battle with each other and come out and have a solution. And we may not all agree with it, but as we were coming out the door, we all knew, okay, that's what we're going to do. Very different in the civilian world, much more relaxed, like you said. And so it took me a while to learn that too, and how to communicate in the civilian world.
So how do we get more veterans into the drilling industry?
So you mentioned a couple of programs, like the employer specific. Lane has Leathernecks to Roughnecks, I think. And I don't know if that's a Lane program. I think it's a program that Lane participates in heavily. And the other one is Helmets to Hard Hats. Helmets to Hard Hats, I personally take issue with. It's very union based. And we don't need to get on the topic of unions, but they make it very difficult for non-union employers to engage with that program. And so from my perspective, you look at the name, I have an expectation of what that means. And when you get in the door, the actuality does not seem to match what their mission is. And that's a big problem. And Jake, I know, can attest to this. It's like you see all these non-government organizations in support of veterans, and then you see the actuality compared to the mission. And it's like, how did you stray so far? And I understand why. Again, going back to private industry versus the military, it's all about control. At the end of the day, the unions, for the greater good of the people that they are responsible to, want to maintain as tight control over their labor pool as possible. And so you can't fault the unions for wanting to do that. That is their mission, to protect their industry. But the DoD has the Skill Bridge program, which is a great idea. In practice, though, it is very difficult for employers to engage in that program without having a lot of time and money, due to the way all of the stipulations that are in place. It's very friendly to large employers, and small employers, it's not. And when you look at the metrics in the U.S., 90% of the businesses in the United States are small, I think, or something like that. So 90% of the quantity of employers are small businesses. And I could be wrong on that figure, but I'm not far off, which means, 10% of the employers are in a place to be able to take advantage of those types of programs. I mean, I just go back to how I was hired. When I was hired, I joined a 45 employee organization. And I imagine, knowing that there were only 45 employees, now looking back at the fact that they went to Camp Lejeune twice a month, and they went to Camp Pendleton once a month for a small business with 45 employees, how do you afford that? But the flip side of it is that they experienced lower attrition rate, or a lower average attrition rate, right? And so it kind of balanced out, especially now when I look at the cost of hiring and onboarding an employee. Before we even really start getting into OJT, just initial upfront costs, $7,000 or $8,000. And so if you can reduce that to a year, reduce the departures by 2 a year, you've saved $14,000. Well, yeah. So there's an investment or potential return on investment of reducing attrition rate and gaining a valuable employee, but it's difficult for business owners to recognize the benefit, or difficult to swallow the risk associated with the potential benefit. And the other piece is that I think I've spoken about it before, but I have noticed over the past 10 years a growing sense of entitlement that everybody throws around on Fox News heavily and whatever, about, employees feel greater entitlement to this or that or whatever. And seeing a lot of stuff in the veteran community, I think it's very pervasive. And I think that is partly due to so many organizations screaming, thank a veteran for whatever, and you deserve better, and all of this stuff. And not to say that people don't, but at the end of the day, the other realization that we all need to have is that when we come out of the military, we're just another human in America. And that's not to discount what anybody did, but there's a lot of construction workers that have done a hell of a lot of good and never been in the military. And I don't want to discount what they did either.
You're ready to start the next chapter of your life and career.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know where to start because I agree with all that stuff. Yeah, as far as programs, I'm a big advocate of the idea of skill bridge. I brought that to a number of employees that were, I would say, medium size. I definitely agree. It's a difficult process to navigate, but the benefits of it really come down to that the military foots the cost for you to evaluate whether or not this employee is a good fit. And likewise for the person, because I think part of the issue with getting military people into, drilling and construction or any industry is like you said, they're people. They don't know 100% what they want, because especially if you're a guy a guy or a gal that came into the military right out of high school, that's your only life experience, right? Unless you worked somewhere growing up or whatever. That's your only experience. So, you really don't know what you want. And, I came out of active duty when I was 27, 28. And even after, all that experience in college and everything, looking back, I still didn't really have an idea of what I was looking for. And through several experiences, and fortunately having a very supportive wife, my first year out of the military, I went through several different jobs. It was kind of rocky. I was scared I was doing something wrong. I was like, I had my first job and I was like, it's not a great fit. But I used that first year to kind of really explore and find out what I wanted. And ultimately I went back to doing the same type of work that I did for the military. Just now I work for a school district and I feel very fulfilled with the work. But all that experience was really, really good. Definitely moving to the sense of entitlement. This is something I saw a lot of, especially on the officer side, people coming out and thinking they're worth, more than they really are. I know full bird colonels that would come out and think that they were, worthy of being the vice president of a company just because they had led large units. And it's like, these people don't know you. They don't necessarily know your ability, whether or not to lead. Maybe you should let those people ask the units that you led. Maybe you weren't actually as good a leader as you thought. But there's definitely for some people, that sense of entitlement. And I've talked to a lot of buddies and helped a lot of buddies get jobs, and really kind of help them understand, that we're just normal folks. It's not discounting, like you said, anything anybody's done. It's just, how do you figure out what you want, and how do you find a place that has what you're looking for, and build it's really a relationship you're trying to build with an employer. And so I think, as my note to employers is to just kind of be patient, right? I know employers' time is money, but particularly with veterans, you're getting people coming from way different experiences than most people. And so they're trying to figure out what they want. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was onboarding. I think onboarding is probably the worst experience I had in most of the places I went, because either it was non-existent or just wasn't well crafted. And the thing with military people is, we like it honest and upfront, right? Just tell us what it is. Okay. If it's not going to work out, we want to be able to communicate that we're not happy or you're not happy. And your onboarding process doesn't need to be this flash bang whizzy thing. It needs to be very direct and help people understand what they're getting into, so that they can understand if it's a good fit for them or not. Because that onboarding process is really, that's where someone's deciding, it's that first impression between the employer and the employee. So onboarding is super important, in my opinion, for companies looking to hire veterans, especially.
Thank you for joining us for episode 36. It is insane to believe we're 36 weeks into this, 9 months. Thanks for sharing. Please like and subscribe, and pass this on to other construction colleagues and drilling colleagues. Next week, we'll wrap up with part 2 with Jake and Rob, which starts talking about employee expectations and retention, and being beyond just a veteran in a company, but what it takes to keep people and take care of people. Check out thedriller.com for the latest content. This Friday, November 11th, is Veterans Day. The day before that's the Marine Corps birthday. Semper Fi, Marines. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jake, for again sharing all your knowledge on leadership through all of your articles, and for coming on to this newscast to talk about it. Have a safe and productive week.